In this special episode of Tips from the Top Floor, find out if having something is better than needing something, learn what's so magic about dipping your fingers in chemistry, and listen in while I talk to a particle physicist from the Large Hadron Collider project about how to produce dead pixels on your camera sensor. This is Tips from the Top Floor, episode 776 for Thursday, May the 11th, 2017.
Tips from the top floor, tips from the top, alright, from the top floor.
Hey and welcome, this is Chris Marquardt. You're listening to Tips from the Top Floor, the longest running photography show on the planet, coming to you from the Viewfinder Villa right outside the gates of Hanover. And this is a bit of a different episode, a special episode. And it revolves around film photography. And a bit of digital in the second part, but okay, how did this come along? Well, Monica, my better half, and I, we have written the book, the Film Photography Handbook, originally in German, Absolut Analog. And we're both podcasters, and we've been asked over and over by people, is there a good German photography podcast around film photography? And there is none. So recently we decided, let's go for it. Let's make one. So there is now the Absolut Analog Film Photography podcast in German. Sorry, it's not in English yet. Maybe, I don't know. Never say never. No plans though. But there is this podcast now, and we have already recorded like 10 episodes. And it's going to be more and more. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to bring a few of those topics over here to those of you who might be film curious. So there are 3 different episodes that I want to pick out for that we've already recorded and put on the air. And the first is about limitation. The second is about why would you develop film yourself. And the third is an interview with a particle physicist, which anyway, I'll talk to you about it in the second half of the show. So let's get started. This is from the first episode of Absolut Analog, and it goes back to something that has become a bit of a meme on some of the German forums, photography places that we frequent. And it's the sentence, it's hard to translate, but it's pretty much, it says to have something is better than to need something. So it implies that I'd rather have more gear than to get into the situation where I can't do something because I don't have the specific thing for it. And it always kind of, it's a thing that people say tongue in cheek, and it always leaves me with a sort of a funny aftertaste, because the experience that I've done, that I've had with shooting film, kind of goes against that. Because film means, if you shoot film, it means you will limit yourself. You will have some limitation. You won't have limitless supplies to do what you want to do. So one of the experiences that Monica and I both have made by shooting film is that the limitation has made us more creative. It pretty much forces you to do that. That's one of the ways that creativity works. If you have everything, then you can't be creative. It's virtually impossible. Only if you have to think outside the box, then that's where creativity happens. So limitation, let's say you put in a roll of black and white film. That means you've decided to shoot in black and white. Like, you can't just switch over to color. Your world is going to be in black and white for the rest of that roll of film. Or let's say you use a 50-year-old camera that doesn't have a light meter. Well, that is an amazing learning opportunity all of a sudden. You will learn more than you ever thought you would about metering. And then you will have that available to your disposal using it in your digital photography. So that will make you a better photographer. Also, every shot on film will cost you money. So you will automatically become a more thoughtful photographer, because you will have to, you will not even have to, you will just use that medium and think a bit about more when you take a shot. So it is really these few things that I think are some of the reasons why film is so interesting, because it really forces you outside your usual path and kind of forces you to think outside the box. So that was, in a nutshell, our first episode. The third one I found really interesting because we always get this question, oh, I'm so interested in film photography, but why would you develop film yourself? Why would you go through that hassle of using chemistry and, I don't know, a dark room and stuff? By the way, you don't need a dark room to develop film. But of course, you can hand in film. You can hand film into the lab. The labs will do it for you. I'm pretty sure the places that used to take film, most of the bigger ones at least, will still take it, and they will send it into a bigger lab, and they will develop pretty much every kind of film for you. Now, with color film, we actually do that. We hand color film to a lab. The lab does it for us, returns the negatives and some prints if you want to. And there's a reason why with color film we're not as keen on doing it ourselves, and that's because color film is standardized. Color film is industrialized. It used to be a huge business in the 90s and before. And every 1 hour photo place can develop every color negative film that's on the market today. It's a standardized process, and it will yield consistent results. So you can take Fuji film and develop in a color negative film and develop it in Kodak chemistry, and it'll come out just fine, and vice versa. So we have this standardized world, and that's because you need to be able to feed that roll of film into a machine, and the machine will do it for you, so you don't have any variation there. Now, it's different with black and white. When we go black and white, that whole thing turns a bit more magic, because now you have choices. Every black and white film that you have, or virtually every black and white film, you can develop that with virtually every developer. There are developers by Kodak, by Fuji, by Tetanol, by Ilford, and so on. There's a lot of different developers. I'd say at least 30, 40, 50 different developers on the market. And there are lots of films on the market, and you can develop every single one of those black and white films with any of the other developers. Now, some will yield better results, some will yield worse results, but they will be different results, and they might be different for a good reason, because you can influence things using the right combination and even the right recipe, because even within those combinations of film and developer, you can change parameters. You can develop longer or shorter. You can develop with a more diluted developer or with a stronger developer. You can change the temperature at which you develop, and that will influence the result. And it will influence things like the grain structure of the film or the contrasts of what that film shows. In general, you will influence the look of your result, and that is pretty cool. And yes, you will, and it doesn't mean you'll have to have 50 different developers at home and 50 different kinds of film. You will probably over time get to your favorites, and then have some go-to recipes that you know will yield a certain look. But it's still a magic process, because you take your standard combination that you know the contrast of, and then you see that you shot this roll of film under more flat lighting, and then all you have to do is adjust the recipe a bit to boost the contrast, and you have the results straight from the film as you need them. It's also a very haptic experience. To develop film means that you will at the end have a product in your hand. And if you are a maker, if you've ever baked your own cake from scratch, or did some home improvement work, or I don't know, anything that yields a physical product that you can hold in your hands, whenever you've done that, have you ever felt that sense of pride in what you've done? Then you can touch it and you can show it to people. And have you ever had this sense of satisfaction at the end? Well, that's exactly the same if you shoot film. After I develop and then scan a roll of film, and I'm talking roll film here, 12 pictures on a film, I am way more happy and satisfied than if I shot 200 digital photos. It is a thing of beauty to hold that in your hand and go, wow, I did that. Look, I'm so proud of what I did, because you can hold it in your hands. It's very different from pictures that are somewhere on a memory card. It's just a very different feeling. So again, you can shoot black and white film and hand it into the lab. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to just get started, then go get one of these cardboard cameras that you can still get in drugstores, and then send it in for development and get your pictures back. But if you really want the big experience, don't deprive yourself of that experience. So that's just a few reasons why we love film so much. Next, episode 6 of Absolut Analog, and that will lead straight into our interview, is titled Flying with Film, X-Ray and Cosmic Particles. That's the big question that we always get. Yeah, I would love to shoot film, but I would love to shoot film like on a vacation. Can I travel with film? What happens? And yes, it is true. X-ray will fog your film. It will expose your film, and that will manifest itself on the film as kind of foggy patterns, but only if it's strong enough. So film comes at different film speeds, different ISOs, pretty much same as digital. There's a film that is not as sensitive, and there's film that's more sensitive, and they even use the same thing. So it says ISO 100 on the roll of film, or ISO 400, up to ISO 3200. You can buy ISO 3200 film. And if the X-ray is strong enough, then it will fog your film. But normally that's not the case. Like the scanners in airport security that you put your hand luggage through are typically not strong enough to do that. Especially if you put in a few precautions, like getting a protective bag, like a lead-lined bag, which might still be available in some shops and on eBay and so on. And that used to be the standard when you traveled with film. But then the next question is, what happens when I put my digital camera through the X-ray? Does it harm my sensor? And then the next question is, when you fly up in the air, there is radiation, cosmic radiation and cosmic particles that you're exposed to when flying in an airplane at a high altitude. And how will that interact with film and with your camera sensor? Now, it's a good thing that several years ago I talked to an actual particle physicist, Professor Frank Linde from CERN. He's been quite deeply involved in the LHC project. That's the Large Hadron Collider, the big particle accelerator. So if anyone knows about radiation and particles, it's probably him. Now, I've had this interview on a previous show, but I found it so fitting here, so here it is again. All right, so I'm here with Professor Frank Linde from where are you exactly?
I'm from the Netherlands, Amsterdam, the University of Amsterdam, in fact, and from an institute which studies, let's say, the smallest constituents of our universe.
So if I got this wrong, so you are another speaker here on the ship, which puts me in very smart company, and you are in some ways entangled with what's going on at CERN, at the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider. You are among those people who are looking for pretty much those particles that are still to be found, including the Higgs boson, right?
Yeah, in fact, I think the Higgs boson is already since 50 years the sacred, the holy grail of particle physics, okay? It was hypothesized to exist in 1963. Now we are living in 2012. And I think this is unique this year, because I think at the end of this year we either will have discovered it, or we will have proven that it doesn't exist.
Or you will have to rewrite physics, basically.
Or someone else has to rewrite it. To be honest, I think it's even more exciting if we don't find it.
Yeah, you have been, as far as I read here, you have been intimately involved in the Atlas detector, which is one of the two big parts of this particle thing. There's the accelerator that brings those particles up to speed, and then there's the detector without which nothing would really, I mean, you could smash as many particles into each other as you want, but if you can't detect them, then there's not much point doing that, right?
Yeah, that's quite well formulated. In fact, I was already with the Atlas detector before it was called the Atlas detector.
Oh, really?
Because it was first called Eagle and Escort. So two big collaborations, and they were forced by the higher-ups to merge. And then it became Atlas.
So what was your role in the Atlas project?
Now, my role was, on the one hand, leading the Dutch contributions to Atlas, but my personal role and fun was designing and also realizing, in fact, a large chunk of Atlas, namely the outer perimeter of Atlas. It's used to measure a kind of heavy variant of the electron. It's called a muon, and that's by far the biggest part of the Atlas detector.
All right. Now, we're not going to go really deep into that because this is tips from the top runs about photography. But in photography, we also deal with particles, photons, pretty much. Can you give me a quick idea of what a photon is?
Can I give you a quick idea what a photon is? Now, a photon is the force carrier. So it's not a particle which constitutes nature. It's a force particle. It's a particle which transmits, in this case, the electromagnetic force.
Okay.
So how do you get force? How do you get photons? Then you just shake electricity, so you shake charge, like a radio emitter, and then you send off photons.
Okay.
And those photons you can receive somewhere else by just having a piece of metal where the photons shake the electric charge in the metal. It's called an antenna. And then by that way you can transmit information, in fact, across empty space.
Right.
So that's basically what photons do, okay?
Right. Well, wave particle thing, I mean, there's lots to say about all this, but in photography, we work with a sensor. And so if you read Tips from the Top Floor, if you read the blog, you will have seen that a few days ago I've written this blog entry about discovering that the sensor on my camera, which is basically the photon detector, so to speak, has hot pixels and probably also a few dead pixels. Several hundred, in fact, and they accumulated over the last few years. So my first idea was I need to find out, first of all, how did this happen, and B, how can I avoid this to happen in the future? And when I was doing some research, all of a sudden a light went on in my head. I was like, wait a minute, we have a particle physicist on board, and so he should be able to tell us a bit about that. So first of all, we have this detector. It's a sensor. It converts those photons into a charge, pretty much.
Yeah, that's very correct, yeah. In fact, we use exactly the same detectors in our experiments, okay? You have a 10 megapixel or 20 megapixel camera.
Yeah.
We have a 140 million pixel camera.
Awesome.
It's not so big, in fact. It's only a factor of 7 bigger. But ours works 40 million times a second, so yours only 100 times a second, I think.
You do 40 million detections per second.
Yeah, 40 million times per second these particles in the Large Hadron Collider collide. And every time we must be ready to observe or discover this fantastic event happening there, which doesn't happen very often, but at least we have to be able to measure and decide not interesting, not interesting, not interesting. And very rarely it is interesting.
Wow, okay.
Now, your real question, of course, is how the heck do I make sure that my CCD chip or my camera doesn't get worse?
Right. So what's happening here? Why do those hot pixels happen? My guess is there is some radiation involved.
Yeah, it's also particles, okay? It's due to radiation coming from outer space. It's called cosmic rays. It was discovered something like 100 years ago. And even today, we don't know exactly where it comes from. Of course, you can guess. It's just some very energetic event happening in stars.
Oh, that's like a supernova or something?
Yeah, for instance, a supernova might radiate these particles, but we have not really proven this. Because it sounds maybe very easy, of course. You just measure a cosmic ray.
No one has gone to a supernova and stuck a sensor in there, right?
And of course we do observe the radiation here, but if you see it coming from straight up, it doesn't always come from straight up. Because there are lots of magnetic fields and these particles deflect in the universe. So we don't really know where they come from. But these particles have so much energy that they are capable of upsetting the electronics in your CMOS device. And then at some moment you get a stuck bit or you get a completely ruined channel.
It can basically fuse parts of the electronic together or split it up. And
So and that happens also a lot in our detector, in fact. So we always try to make radiation hard.
So Atlas detector has hot and dead pixels pretty much.
And percentage-wise more than in your photo camera. Because you have fractions of a percent, really fractions.
Yeah.
We typically have a per mil dead channels or so.
Right. I think about a thousandth of a percent or something of my sensor. So what kind of particles would those be? Can we see them? Can we detect them?
Now, in fact, seeing particles is, of course, very interesting. I mean, most of your audience will strongly believe in the existence of electrons. But I can tell you, even my grandmother has never seen an electron, okay? Yeah. And we all believe in it. So seeing particles, I think, is not so easy to say. I mean, you see the tracks of particles. And yes,
You see what they do when
Exactly.
you turn what they do into light, because we see light, right?
correct. So in fact, in the end, we see light. That's the sensitivity of our eye. So what we do, we convert tracks in particles in visible information. Tracks we call that, and those you can see. And in that sense, you can just as well see the track of an electron and a track of a so-called heavy electron, this muon, which is to some extent at the cause of your damaged photo camera. But there are also neutrons, it's half of your mass. They have no charge, but they can do really nuclear interactions in electronics. And then it really ruins some of your electronics. And these particles all come from outer space, okay? And if you are high up in the sky, then you are more sensitive to it. So if you fly a lot, you get more radiation.
Is that because the atmosphere shields us from some of the radiation?
Yeah, it's twofold. At the top of the atmosphere, it makes sure the very energetic particles degrade in energy. So they become a complete shower of multiple particles. And that slowly close to the surface
Is
of
that
these...
because they collide with something else?
Yeah, they collide and then they split and they generate more particles, and that sometimes then peters out by the time you reach the surface of the Earth.
Okay.
So at the surface it's less, halfway it's more, typically where your airplane is, and very high up it's very rare, the radiation, but they are incredibly energetic. So if they hit you well. Okay?
That would be people on the ISS, for example.
Exactly. For instance, if you want to go to Mars, it's even worse. Then you really have to worry about these things, because then you cannot just take an empty slot, make sure that you don't have radiation at that moment.
Right.
Then you really have to be very careful. Either a big water wall or some big magnets. I would worry then. So I'm not going to Mars. Okay, so no way.
Okay, so just as an idea, do you have an idea about the amount of these particles? We're talking neutrons, right?
Now the neutrons, I don't know the exact number, but I know this heavy electron is typically 1 per second through your hand.
If you stretch out your hand or anywhere through your hand, 1 per second.
Yeah, and if you now think that's a lot, I can tell you there is so much going on in space which you have no notion of. Okay.
So in these, you told me that up front, these pretty much go through you most of the time.
They go through, but they don't go through the Earth. Okay, they go 10 meters or so, or 100 meters into the soil, and then they stop and they sit there and they decay and become an electron.
Okay, but your hand is just no match for them. It just goes through.
Oh, your hand is no match.
And if it hits an atom in your hand, then
No, if it really does an interaction, it might shake an electron up a little bit, and then it just moves. But that's not very serious.
And if it hits the sensor in your camera, or if it interacts with something there, that can generate too much energy for this.
It can, but I must admit, most of the real damage is due to neutrons. Neutrons are much heavier than muons, and they are neutral. They can do nuclear interactions, and then they really give it a kick, and that really causes damage.
So, in my blog entry, I asked the question, and I remember back in the film days, and even nowadays shooting film, you have some dangers for film when you fly. One is the X-ray in the airport, in the security, and the other is then the cosmic radiation, which is worse.
Now, for films, I think your X-rays are far worse, because films is made to be sensitive for photons, and notably also X-rays.
X-ray is
X-rays are photons, okay? Yes, I mean, photons, we all know the visible part of the spectrum, that's photons. But there are very hard photons, meaning high energy, that's X-rays, or gamma rays, or even worse. And there is also soft radiation, namely heat. Okay, heat is also photons. Your microwave is also photons. Your radio is also photons.
But for the camera sensor, that X-ray is not that dangerous.
No, for the cameras, for the electronics, the X-rays are not that dangerous. At least not at the intensities you are submitting it to. Of course, in my Atlas detector at the Large Hadron Collider, we get huge fluxes of particles, and our detectors really have to be far more radiation prone than your detector.
So yours don't break as easily?
They don't break as easily, but they still break. And in fact, we have to replace them after something like 10 years.
Okay.
But then luckily, progress in technology helps. Because if you just miniaturize more and more, so making the feature size smaller and smaller, then you automatically become more radiation hard. So that's something you just gain with time.
Because there's not much surface to hit, or
indeed. I mean, it's just if the pixel size becomes smaller, the odds that you hit it becomes smaller, and therefore it's more radiation hard.
It's a game of statistics, basically.
Yeah, it's statistics. Very big sensors are more radiation prone than very, very small sensors.
I see. Okay, so for film and X-ray, I used to use a lead bag. Lead bag, probably 3, 4, 5 millimeters, maybe 3, 4 millimeters thick lead around it, wrapped in plastic, and then you put the film in there, and then at the airport you put it through the X-ray scanner, and the security personnel goes, "Oops, we can't look in there. Let's hand check that." So that seems to work quite well. Could I just stick my camera, my digital camera, into a lead bag, and it would be safe from the cosmic radiation?
No, it would be safe from X-rays and electromagnetic radiation, which is not the one which damages you mostly. If you want to be safe for neutrons or muons, I think you have to use an incredibly thick X-ray, a lead bag.
But lead would do it, but it had a meter thick.
Well, I would think a meter. So it depends a bit on the energy. If you're very high energy muon, it really can even traverse a meter.
Okay, so the X-ray bag is not going to help at all.
But think about it, you're very lucky, because there's even another particle, comes from the sun, okay? When the sun is out there, 65 billion per square centimeter per second through the top of your fingernails, okay?
Wait, say that again?
These are neutrinos, okay? They come from the sun. 65 billion per second per square centimeter.
Wait, 65 billion neutrinos go through me.
Yes.
Per second per square centimeter.
Not through you, through the top of your finger, okay?
Through the top of my... Okay, which is just this little square centimeter.
When the sun is out there. If the sun this night is at the other side of the earth, the same 65 billion per square centimeter per second go through your finger, because they are completely not affected by the earth. They just go through.
So Earth just ignores, they ignore...
They ignore almost everything.
Matter.
So it's good for you. In fact, they also ignore your camera, so they don't ruin it. But at least it's very busy out there.
65 billion per second per square. That's a large number. That's a huge number.
Incredibly huge number.
And do they interact with anything?
Yes, they do. We built incredibly big experiments, big water tanks where you can easily fit a whale in. And then we see a few hundred per day.
Okay.
But realize, 65
huge
billion
water tanks, so they will interact with a hydron electron, hydron molecule, water molecule.
In fact, they can
somewhere.
kick sometimes an electron, and if the electron gets a kick, you can see the electron in that water tank.
Right. Wow.
But that's pretty tough experimentation.
They ignore me. They ignore my sensor. They just leave the camera alone.
They basically ignore almost everything. Okay.
And if one hits, I won't probably know anyway.
No, you won't. But so just to illustrate that there is a lot out there you have no idea of. Okay.
Okay. So, a 1 meter thick lead bag won't do it, and I guess if we travel to Mars, it won't also do, because it's too heavy to carry up into space.
It helps, but it doesn't kill everything.
So what do the astronauts on ISS do? Because there are so many particles, or maybe there are some. Are there times when there's more neutrinos? Is that like space weather, and sometimes it's worse and sometimes better?
It definitely are times that there is more radiation. The neutrinos you don't need to worry. Yeah, they're always there. The sun, wherever the sun is, the neutrinos come.
But neutrons?
But the neutrons and let's say the charged particles, they come in waves. They're not always the same intensity.
Right.
And if it really gets bad near the International Space Station, then as far as I know, they shield themselves behind their water tanks. Okay, because that helps still.
So will they actually rotate the ISS to point their water tanks towards the radiation, or?
No, to be honest, I don't know whether they point the water tank, or whether they go behind the water tank. Okay, so they make sure the water tank is between them and I guess the sun, because that's where the fluctuations come from.
Okay. All right. So to recap, the sensor gets damaged by neutrons and by muons.
Yeah.
And these are 200 hot pixels on a 21 megapixel sensor within 3 years is nothing. That's what you say.
Exactly.
Well, and what I can say is that the effects of that, the hot pixels and the dead pixels, the software, the Lightroom and so on, will detect that and fix it automatically. So I don't think there's anything really to worry about. The only thing I know is that companies that build these cameras typically do not ship them via airplane, but via ship, just in order to get them to the client, to the customer, as undamaged as possible.
Yeah, that's probably smart. Yeah, then I don't think these customers really notice, because to be honest, I have a camera, and I'm not aware that I have, let's say, 0.001% of my pixels dead, because as you say, the software is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It's only when you get a whole row or so which starts to be dead, but by that time I think you better turn in your camera or buy a new one if it's too old.
Right. All right, Frank Linde, thank you so much for... That was incredibly interesting. I appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. Thank you as well.
People, there is music in your head.
So, let's recap this very special episode of Tips from the Top Floor. Number 1, limitation furthers creativity, and learning to make decisions and then sticking to them is helpful too. So that's just 2 reasons why film photography is part of what I do. Then there's magic in developing black and white film yourself, and while you could give it to a lab to develop it for you, the result is not just developed film that looks cool, it's also a huge sense of achievement and a great level of satisfaction having done something with your own hands and having produced a tangible and creative result. And finally, X-ray might fog your film if you don't protect it, but cosmic radiation won't really disturb it in any meaningful way. But with digital sensors, it's the other way around. The X-ray at the airport won't bother your sensor, but the cosmic radiation might rattle a few of your many millions of pixels. But not to worry, your image editing software will make sure that you won't even notice those dead and hot pixels.
Down on that instrument.
And that was it for this episode of Tips on the Top Floor. Let me know if you like this kind of thing. I'm happy to keep doing these every now and then, and just to give you a different perspective on things. Maybe one that it's not really interesting for you to do it, but maybe it's interesting for you to just hear another side of things. Anyway, next episode next week will be your questions and answers again. And if you want your question answered on the show, or if you want to comment on anything I said, or tell the listeners something cool that you found, record it on the voice memo app in your iPhone and send it to voice@tfttf.com. That's voice@tfttf.com. Do it right now. Drop everything, unless you're operating machinery. Record it now and send it. I want to hear from you. voice@tfttf.com. Oh, by the way, if you're one of the beautiful, good-looking people who left an iTunes rating or a review, thank you so much for that. You're actually helping the show to be seen by more people. And this is awesome, because that's the only way to give it exposure. If you want more people to find out about Tips on the Top Floor, that's what you do. Go to iTunes, leave a rating or review. Let's keep that community going. You help make this happen, and I really thank you for that. Music for the show by Jeff Smith, the natives of the Newton. Let's try that one again. Music for the show by Jeff Smith, the natives of the Newton and Hans-Peter Kagerud. Publishing by Release Pixie, Matt, Repsitor, Armstead, Slack, invitations handled by our CIO, Russ. My name is Chris Marquardt. Follow me on Facebook or on Twitter at Chris Marquardt, Chris Marquardt. And of course, go out and take amazing photos. Be nice to each other, and happy shooting. Learn what's so magic about dipping your fingers in chemistry, and listen in while I talk to a particle. Is better than needing something. Learn what's so magic about dipping your fingers in chemistry, and listen in while I talk to a